I don't like to go to the doctor very much. I think it's pretty much universally true of guys, right? We don't go to the doctor. There's lots of reasons for that. I'm particularly bad at it, and I'll let problems linger for a long time. Problems that I probably know that I should go to the doctor for. I had, right before I get married, I was having some back pains, and Amanda went to a chiropractor all the time, so I decided, well, I'll try one of those out. So I went to a chiropractor. Long story short, they took an x-ray the way they're supposed to, and he came to me and he said, have you been in a car accident? And I said, no. He said, okay, did you play football? I said, yeah, like 10 years ago. He's like, well, that's what did it. I had these two vertebrae that were completely twisted around the wrong direction and were causing problems all through my back. I lived with that for like 10 years. It wasn't an injury that I knew had happened. It was something that probably happened in the middle of a game or something you didn't even know that happened. It didn't affect my life in that moment. But then I started to think through the years all the things that it had impacted. You know, I had a time when I was in college where I had to lay in bed. I just couldn't get out. I had such great back pain. Or a time after I was out of school where I just I felt like I got shot and I just fell over and I couldn't move. When I would drive for long distances, I would lose feeling in my legs. My legs would get numb. I'd have to stop and get out of the car and move around because I would have a hard time pressing the pedal. And I started to realize all those things are because of that problem. And if you would have asked me at any point, do you want that problem to be gone? Do you want to stop feeling that way? Do you want to not have that pain? My answer would have been, of course. Who wouldn't want those problems to be gone? So why didn't I go to the doctor for 10 years? Why didn't I go and try to find some help for those problems? Why didn't I ever ask anyone why those problems existed? Well, there's a lot of reasons for that, and they offer a lot of reasons for why men in particular don't go to the doctor as much. But the truth is, I had excuses. I was busy. I don't like doctors, particularly the bill that I get after the doctor, right? It's not that big a deal. It's not really a problem. It doesn't bother me that often. It's not something you go to the doctor for. I would have many excuses, and yet at the same time, I would have told you that I did want that problem to be gone. How can those things be true at the same time? How could I want the problem to be gone and yet not go to a place, any place, that could help me with that problem? So we have here in the Gospel of John chapter 5, as we've been talking this year about wanting more of Jesus in our lives and all the places and things we want more of Jesus in. And here in John 5, Jesus asks someone that question. Do you want well? They have an obvious problem, an obvious sickness, an obvious struggle. And he asks, do you want well? It's the question that I believe Jesus wants you to ask yourself today. Do you want well? The answer right away, whatever the problem is, the answer may be obvious. But it's really the next question that you have to struggle with. And that next question is, if you want well, what's keeping you from getting well? If you want to overcome those problems, if you want to get past that hopelessness that we've talked about, that darkness, that depression, that loneliness, that anger, that fear, that sin, that addiction, what's keeping you from doing it? So as we look at this journey when Jesus asked this question, I want you to begin to ask that question in your life. What is it that's keeping you? Because we're going to see the excuse that's offered to Jesus, I think, is often the excuse that we might offer when God comes to us and asks us to make us well, asks us to help us overcome our problems. So, John chapter 5, starts in verse 1. And here, it tells us that Jesus is coming into Jerusalem for a holy day. It doesn't tell us which one, but we know because it's a festival, because it's a holy day, there is a large crowd. There are a lot of people that are coming there at that time. And it tells us that Jesus comes to this pool in Bethsaida. And here's what we know. We found this pool, what we think is this pool. And this pool has 4 corners that are described here like porches. And then one of the porches went down the center of the pool. It divided it into 2 pools, one on each side. And they were like collection pools. This is what was called a mizvah. It was a ceremonial bathing place. And so what existed was on one side, it would collect rainwater. And on one side, there was steps. And when people came to Jerusalem, they would come to this pool, just like Jesus did. They would walk down those steps, and they might get a drink of water out of it. Didn't have bottles of water to carry around, didn't have water fountains, anything like that. This is where they would get a drink. But more importantly, remember, it is a pool for ceremonial cleaning. They would wash themselves. It's a dusty journey. Many of them are coming to go to the temple. So they have to get clean. They have to clean that dirt off. They have to go through a ceremonial cleansing before they can go in. So this is a large gathering place for people all the time, but especially on an occasion like this, on a holy day, where lots of travelers are coming in. And so what this passage tells us is that on those porches, there were a number of people who were sick. Now, it mainly says the blind, the paralyzed, the lame. Not just people with a cold, but people with problems for which there was no other answer. And they gathered at this pool because they believed that when the waters stirred, and here's what we think happened, that other side of the pool, there was a side of the pool without steps, it would collect that rainwater as well. And when the water would go down on the other side, there was a dam that would be lifted so that water would flow into the other side. And when it did that, the waters would stir. When they saw that, there was a belief. This was not a Jewish belief. This was a Greek pagan belief. They believed those waters stirred, and something in the waters being stirred allowed for the first person to get in to be healed. And so these people were gathering on these porches, hoping to see that water stir, hoping to get in, because they have no other means by which to have hope to be healed. So all of these wounded, these sick, these afflicted are hanging out at this pool, hoping for the waters to stir so they can have a chance to be made well. So Jesus notices one man in particular. Jesus shows up at this pool. He notices one guy who it says in verse 5, he uses the word sick. He was sick. Now we know from the rest of the passage that his sickness was he couldn't walk. He's sick. He's been sick this way for 38 years. That is probably the majority of his life. It's been a long time. 38 years he hasn't walked. And Jesus notices him, and he walks up to the man, and he asks him a question. Do you want well? Now, none of us know this guy. We don't know his name. We don't know what happened to him. We don't know how he's sick. All we know is that he can't walk, and he hasn't been able to walk for 38 years. And knowing those two things, we all know the answer to his question, right? I don't have to know anything else about him to know, do you want well? Of course I want well. Why else would I be hanging out at this pool? Why else would I be sitting here by these waters? And the guy doesn't answer him with, I can't, or he doesn't answer him with, that's a dumb question. He doesn't answer him with, of course I do. He doesn't just say yes. He doesn't say any of that. Who wouldn't want to be well? Instead, if you look in verse 7, we see the lame man's answer is what? I can't. Do you want well? I can't doesn't answer that question, does it? That's a yes or no question. But instead of answering yes or no, he says, I can't. I can't. As we've been talking about finding more Jesus in our lives each week, we've been thinking about different areas in our lives that we need more Jesus. And some of you, I know some of you have been thinking about some of your relationships that you need to be made well. And some of you have illnesses, you have sickness, you have struggles right now that you need more Jesus in. Some of you have have struggles, have sins, have some kind of darkness, have some kind of fear, have some kind of depression. You've got all these, we all have these things in our lives. Then we know I need less of me, more Jesus. Like John the Baptist said the first week we looked at. And as we think of this, God is asking us each and every week, do you want well? Do you want to overcome these things? Do you want to move past them? Do you want to be healed of them? It's a yes or no question. It's an either or answer. And yet for so many of us, our answer immediately is, I can't. I can't overcome that. That's not going to change. That'll never be different. I'm always going to have this pain. I'm always going to have this problem. I'm always going to have this person that I have a difficult relationship with. They're not going to change, so I can't be made well there. Each and every one of us has those places where we know we need more Jesus. And we know we need more of the power that He has for us in life. We know we need more of the love and joy and peace and goodness and grace that He has for us. And that answer of I can't reveals what it is that's keeping you from finding what God has for you. See, the lame man's answer of I can't and what he says after reveals four things to us. Here's what it reveals. The lame man's answer, number one, shows he has given up. I can't. He had no hope. All right. He had no hope. He may not want to get well. He may want to get well, but in his heart, he does not believe that he can get well. Some of you aren't answering Jesus' question today the right way because you've given up. You're hopeless. You've just accepted the problem will always be a part of your life, whatever it is. Number two, the lame man's answer offers excuses. I have no one to put me in the pool. All he sees are the reasons he cannot get well. All he can do is tell you why he isn't well. He has all the excuses in the world for why he lays there by that pool and nothing changes. And some of you, you have no real interest in changing your life. You're only interested in offering excuses for why it can't be changed. Number three, the lame man's answer places blame. No one will put me in the pool. Someone else gets there first. It's always somebody else is the reason I'm not well. Because of what somebody else is or isn't doing, that's the reason I'm not well. It's never our fault, is it? We love to point blame on everyone else in life. Sometimes we place the blame on God. We blame Him for the problems. Because then we never have to look inside of ourselves and see what in us needs changed and made different. I promise you, it's not others that are keeping you from overcoming the pains and problems in your life. You might have convinced yourself with the excuses. You might have convinced yourself with the blame, but it doesn't change the fact that those are excuses and they're keeping you from getting well. Last thing, number four, the lame man's answer points out obstacles. Someone always gets there first. It's too hard to get there to the pool first. I mean, he's a lame man. That's a very real physical thing, right? He can't get up and get into the pool. He has to have help. So there's something difficult standing in my way, right? Now, Jesus doesn't do this because He's kind and good and compassionate. But if it were me, I immediately would have asked him, then why are you hanging out by this pool? Why do you keep coming back to this pool every day if there's no chance for you to get in it first and get healed? What's the point of coming somewhere where you've just told me why this pool can't make you well? Which I agree, the pool can't make you well. Those waters aren't going to do anything. It's only the living water that's going to do anything to change your life. So, why are you here all the time then? if you can't get in and somebody always beats you and there's no reason that you're ever going to be first? Why? We get so caught up in what stands between us and being made well, what stands between us in wholeness and forgiveness, that at some point we stop thinking about what we're really trying to do in the first place. We're like going through the motions of getting better, but not actually doing the things to overcome the problems and be made well. These obstacles are a distraction from our enemy. They're a distraction that says, let me tell you why you can't do in your life what God wants to do in your life. Let me tell you why you can't get past the problem, why you can't get past the sin, why you can't get past the struggle. And the obstacle becomes our focus rather than the healing and wholeness that God has promised us. So Jesus responds, and he doesn't say, okay, well, I guess you can't, so find somebody else to heal. What does he say? Stand up. Pick up your mat. Walk. The hopelessness, the excuses, the blame, the obstacles. Jesus doesn't hear any of it. None of that matters to him. None of that can stop him. None of that can hold him back. None of that sounds too great for Jesus to do in this man's life what he is there to do in his life. So as soon as the man offers him excuses, Jesus looks at him and says, stand up. Pick up the mat and walk. He doesn't say, let me help you get in the pool. He doesn't say, that disciples, come on, let's go, let's pick them up, let's get ready to throw them in. He doesn't do that. He doesn't use the answers that that man wants to use to change his life. He doesn't need those. He said, quit saying that you can't. Quit offering excuses. Quit giving up. Quit giving in. Quit blaming everyone else. Quit looking at the obstacles and stand up. And what does he do? He stands up. Now, I want you to think about how amazing that is. Does that ask you to raise your hand if you've had knee surgery in this place? But yeah, it's pretty much everybody. We know that, right? How many of you just stood up off the surgery table? Just went right back to walking? No? No. Right there, Jeff did? All right. They didn't do the surgery, Jeff. They just put you under. I just told you they did. You had to go through rehab, right? You had to relearn how to walk. This guy doesn't do that. He doesn't say he's like Bambi on ice or anything like that when he gets up. He just stands up and walks. He hasn't used those legs for 38 years. And he has no struggle. He's completely healed, completely well, completely restored to the ability that God had created him to have. You see, when we get past our excuses, when we stop focusing on the obstacles, when there's nobody else to blame, when there's no one else to do it for us, when we stop saying, I can't, when we stop saying it won't work, when we stop saying somebody needs to help me, when you start pointing to all the reasons that you can't do it, instead of the excuses, he listened to Jesus and did what Jesus said. He had to have enough faith to take that first step, to stand up and walk, to stand up and be healed, to stand up and be made whole, to finally know that he was loved holy as he was. To know that he wasn't alone. To know that the voices in his head were a liar. To know that his heart didn't have to be broken forever. To know that that pain could stop. To trust that his life could be changed. I know that some of you are sitting here today and you're thinking, there's no one the problems in my life will ever be different. There's no way they'll ever change. I want to be made well, but I'm stuck with these things. And I promise you, that will be the truth you live out as long as you keep believing it. But it is not the truth. Because the truth is, there is one in Christ Jesus who can speak to the change that needs to happen in whatever your condition is. Whatever your problem is, whatever your struggle is. No matter how long you've had it, no matter how real your excuses are, no matter how great the obstacles are, He can overcome them. You have to get up. You have to have enough faith to take that first step towards Him. Even if it's lived in your heart for 38 years or longer, it's not too late. If that man would have laid on his mat, if he wouldn't have moved, if he wouldn't have stood up, would it have meant that Jesus did not have the power to heal him? Of course not. See, some of you think, you sometimes doubt that the power of God can do in your lives what it promises to do. But as we keep seeing in each and every one of these passages, to find more Jesus, you've got to take the first step. He's calling you to do it. He's telling you, I'm right here to find more of Him. I'm right here for you to embrace more of what I have for you in life. But you got to stand up. I'm not going to pick you up and do it for you. You've got to have enough faith to trust and believe what I've called you to do and to walk in the path that I've called you to. Stand up and find that healing and wholeness. When you change something like that, some problem or pain that's become your identity. I mean, the guy, he's not the lame man anymore, is he? Not at the end of the passage. He's not the sick guy. He's not the guy who sits by the pool every day. He doesn't call him the well man. We don't know what his name is. He's a new identity now. Some of you, it's hard to let go of your problems because it's become who you are. You've allowed it to define you. You don't know who you are without that struggle. You don't know who you are without that brokenness. But I'll tell you who you are. You are a son or daughter of the God Most High. And until you have enough faith to believe that that's enough and that that's your identity, that that's who you are, then you continue to live in the brokenness and pain that you've struggled in for so long. Now, He doesn't just get up and walk, does He? He doesn't walk away and nothing else happens. When God works in our lives, that doesn't mean the enemy quits. It doesn't mean there aren't more hardships and pains and problems, right? What happens? There's two things here. There's more than two, but we're going to focus on two today. Two things that we see here that we have to do after we get more of this Jesus. After we've taken that step of faith, He's worked in my life, He's done great things. There's two things I want you to see. What it tells us in the passage is, after all this, that this happened on the Sabbath day. And when this guy who's been lame for 38 years picks up his mat and walks, the religious leaders see it and they aren't excited. They don't say, man, look how great God is. Look at what God can do. Can you believe God has worked in this way? No, they say, it's the Sabbath day and you're carrying your mat and you should know better than that. Who did this? Who healed you? Because he says, listen, the guy just told me to pick up my mat and walk, and I picked up my mat and walked. I didn't care whether it was a Sabbath or not. I haven't walked in 38 years. They said, who did it? He said, I didn't ask the guy's name. That's what he says. I don't know who did it. He's so excited he's walking, he doesn't even think about who did it, right? See, when these things happen to you, when that change comes to your life, there are going to be people that are not okay with it. There are going to be people that stand against it. Because the identity that they see you with is in your brokenness and pain too. And what we have to do is to not listen to those people. I mean, could you imagine if he listened to him? If he said, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know I couldn't do that. And he just sat back down and stopped walking. I'll go back to the pool and sit there like I'm sick still. How foolish would that be? And yet, some of us, some of the time, we allow what other people think and what other people say about what God wants to do in our lives or about what God is calling us to do in our lives to keep us from doing it. Because they see it as foolishness. You can't allow what other people say and what other people believe about what God's doing in your life to keep you from standing up and walking into His way. Don't let the foolish objections from those who think they have your life figured out for you keep you from what God has for you. Number 2, you have to find the cure to your real sickness. Because here's what happens then. Jesus finds the man. And he catches up to him. And listen, he gives him a new identity first. Notice that. Now you are well. You're not sick anymore. You're not broken anymore. You're not lame anymore. You are now well. I've given you a new life. So stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you. Now, in the English, that sounds like a threat, right? It's not how it's intended to sound, but once we translate it, it's kind of what it sounds like to us. It's not a threat. It's Jesus wanting the best for his life from this point forward. And what Jesus is saying is that you can walk again, you're well, and that's great. But you have a bigger problem. And that is what sin does to your heart and life. And if you don't stop that, not walking for 38 years is going to seem like nothing compared to what living with the problem of sin in your heart will do. What happens as a result of that is far worse than the brokenness that being lame caused. And so, Jesus is saying you have to overcome that sin to find a cure for your real sickness. Stop sinning, Jesus tells him, because the fate that will be suffered by those who are not healed of that sin cannot be compared with the pain and suffering of this world. Jesus has made a way for us to overcome that sin, to overcome that sickness that leads to death. We all need healing of that sickness in our souls, in our spirits, in our hearts, because of that sickness, each and every one of us has. I have it, you have it, everybody here has it, or had it. The Word became flesh and picked up a cross and walked up a hill of death. Had his hands and feet hammered to a rugged piece of wood. Was raised up on that wood and allowed himself to be mocked and ridiculed by men. And then had all of our sin and all of our shame and all of our suffering thrown upon him. He hung there not because he was guilty. He hung there not because he had that sickness unto death. He hung there because I needed cured of that sickness. Because I had sinned. Because I needed to be made well. And overcome the hopelessness that my sinful life was leading me to. He loved me too much to allow me to remain in that sickness. So he suffered and he bled and he died. But friends, we are here today because he picked up that mat that the cross put him on, and he walked out of that tomb. And he overcame sin and the death it brings to offer you life. So you come here and you struggle with problems of this world. But I promise you, until you overcome that sickness, and until you haven't let God heal you of that, then the problems of this world are not your real problems. And when you overcome that sickness, you'll find a pathway to peace that Jesus has for us. Do you want well? Are you tired of laying on your mats at the pools of this world? tired of the weight of hopelessness, tired of the excuses, tired of the blame that's kept you from facing your problems and struggles, tired of allowing the obstacles from allowing you to move forward in life, then get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Walk in the love and grace and truth that Jesus Christ has for you. It's this old story about a beggar who lived on the streets right outside the king's palace. And one day, the king's servants came out and they posted this announcement in front of the king's palace. And they announced this banquet. The king was putting on this great banquet to celebrate him and his family. And anyone who was dressed in royal robes could come to the banquet. And the beggar sat and he would read that every day, and he could only imagine what a king's banquet would look like. He could only imagine the things that would come across that table. Some of you are excited for our big game party. You can only imagine the food that's going to be there, right? You're excited about that. This kind of food, the king's food, blows that out of the water. It's beyond imagination, beyond anything he's ever had before. And he thought, I just wish that I wasn't a beggar. I just wish that I could come and go to that king's banquet. And he sat and he thought about it every day until one day he thought, you know what, I got an idea. He went to the gates and he went to one of the king's servants and he said, I'd like to speak to the king. The servant went off, came back. He said that the king said, he'll welcome you. You can come, he'll hear what you have to say. So he went before the king. The king said, I hear that you want to speak to me. And he fell before the king. He said, "O king, I see the banquet that's going to be held to celebrate you and your family. And I so desperately want to come to that banquet, but I don't have royal robes. And so I'm wondering, maybe you have some old robes that you don't wear anymore. And maybe I can have one of those robes so I could come to that banquet." And the king smiled and said, "No, you can't have one of my old robes. But let me bring my son in. And I'll allow my son to dress you in one of his new robes." So the son came and he got the man and he brought him to his room. And they went and they came and found his newest clothes. And they dressed him in the ones that fit him. And they got him all ready. And he said, "You can now come to the banquet." But not only that, these robes, these clothes, they will never get old. They'll never be dirty. They'll never wear out. You will never have to wear those old clothes or any other clothes ever again. The king has dressed you in his clothes. You are now part of his family, and you can wear these robes for the rest of your life. So the man went to leave. He was so excited that he got to go to the banquet. But as he was leaving, out of the corner of his eye, he saw all his old rags lying in the corner. The rags that he had worn for so many years as he begged on the streets. And he couldn't help but think, what if the son is wrong? What if the clothes don't last forever? What if they get dirty? What if I might need those rags again? So he quickly grabbed his rags and he balled them up. He tucked them under his arm and he hid them there. He went to the banquet holding his rags. And as he sat at the table, he was so consumed by the rags, so distracted by the thinking they might slip and fall or that someone might see them, he missed half of the delicacies that were coming by him. The banquet he wanted so much to celebrate, instead of enjoying it, he couldn't help but think of his rags the whole time. When the banquet was over, the son proved to be right. The robes lasted forever. But that man never let go of his rags. In fact, they got to the point where the rags became like his obsession, making sure he had them. Wherever he would go, he would ask, did I bring my rags? Do I have my rags? I didn't drop any, did I? He became known as the man with the rags. Till the day he was dying. The king had welcomed him into his family, so he came to watch his son die. He knelt before him, and the king saw his rags, and he wept. And the man wept with him, knowing that he had forfeited a lifetime with the king for rags. Do you want well? It's the question that Jesus asks you today. But it's an either-or question. It's a yes or no. Either you do or you don't. The guy at the end of the story couldn't be the man who was well and lame at the same time, could he? You cannot be someone who's been made whole by Jesus and hold on to the brokenness of your life. You cannot hold on to all those things that were done to you in the past. Those rags will keep you from understanding and knowing the fullness of what Jesus has for you. You cannot hold on to the guilt of the things that you've done. He came to wash that away. You got to let those rags go. You cannot hold on to the brokenness and pain of this life because Jesus came to restore us, to make all things new. That one day the pain and brokenness of this life would be no more. That's the promise to which we cling. He has come so that you can be sons and daughters of the King. And you let rags keep you from knowing what He has for you, what He wants for you, what He can do for you. Either you want more of Jesus or you don't want Him at all. There's no middle ground. Either you want well or you want to remain sick. Either you want God to change your life or you want to stay the same. Either you want to wear the rags of this world or you want to be dressed in the King's glory. Either you want to be a beggar or you want to be a son and daughter of the King. You can continue to lie and wallow in your brokenness by the pools of this world. That's a choice. Or you can get up and walk. What will you hold on to today? Your rags? Or the healing and wholeness, the love and grace, the truth that He has for you? I'm going to call the worship team to come up. And as they play this closing, I want you to know this altar is open this morning. We're going to come to the communion table here after this, and if there's something in your heart that you want to be made well of, something in your life that you want to be made well of, something that you need to find healing and hope for, especially if you haven't begun that relationship with Him, if you haven't really dealt with that sickness unto death, that sin. If you haven't dealt with that yet, then that needs to be number one on your list. Let Jesus take care of that. And then He'll bring you healing and everything else. Whatever that is, if you need to be made well today, stand up. Bring your mat to Him. Let Him take those rags. Let Him bring you healing and hope. Whatever it is today, it's time for you to make that first step of faith and to finally come to the one person who can heal you from all the pain and brokenness of this world. Dress you in His clothes and to give you hope, not just for today, but for eternity. Do you want well? Stand up and walk. Let's stand and sing this hymn today. Amen. You may go.